My name is Rabbi Gary Oren. I'm one of the vice presidents of the AJU and dean of the Whizin Center for Continuing Education. I'm really happy to welcome you to the Gindi Auditorium and to our campus, and I want to thank you for being here tonight to join us for this event. And we are very proud of our relationship with the 92Y in New York City. Who knows that place? You know it? Yeah, I get to visit that a couple times a year. It's a great place. I developed a partnership with them. They have this concept called 7 Days of Genius. They launched it perhaps 4 or 5 years ago. Last year was the first year that they reached out to partners, and we have been working with them. So this year, from March 5th through the 12th, there are more than 20 global events that are being held in 5 different continents, 27 different countries, 40 cities around the world, as diverse as Bangalore, India, and Nairobi, Kenya, Bucharest, Romania, Jerusalem, all over the United States, as far away as Anchorage, Alaska, and in California here. Aren't you glad you're here, not Anchorage, Alaska? The 7 Days of Genius, the idea behind it, it aspires to propel a global conversation about genius, about what it is, what does it matter to have it, how it works, and really how can we cultivate a new generation of geniuses who will make the world a better place. So tonight our artist, our guest, our educator, our advocate perfectly fits the bill of genius. So John Paul Thornton is an award-winning professional painter who regularly conducts workshops and lectures to audiences around the world. He has had the honor of being invited to lecture in China, represent the United States in exhibitions in Japan and Australia. He has taught at LACMA, at UCLA, at the Sophia Painting School in Japan. He has served as the art education coordinator with the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, working on projects with MoCA, Getty Research Institute, and on international exchanges with Mexico. He's also received honors from CBS Television, the California State Senate, the U.S. Congress. His book, Art and Courage, Stories to Inspire the Artist Warrior Within, seeks to unleash the creative genius lurking in each and every one of you, and that's what he's here to talk with us about tonight. How the language of hidden imagery and sacred meaning found in the paintings of our great Western artists are designed to impact our emotions, reach into our subconscious, and provoke us to think as geniuses ourselves. So just a little plug. He's modest. He's leading a trip. He's leading a trip to Paris, France, and the south of France. It's July 23rd through August 7th. He has 4 spots left. If you're interested in art in Paris, right? He has a little spot. I just have to ask you kindly, if you have a cell phone or something like that, will you go ahead and shut that off or turn it on silent before your neighbor gives you the look? You don't want the look. And without any further ado from me, thank you again for being here. I'm proud to introduce the genius of the artist's mind, and Mr. John Paul Thornton.
Thank you very much. This is a great night. What a great opportunity. I'm so grateful to be here. And I can already, peer into the audience, and I can see many people who are students of mine, friends of mine, and also many of you who are new here. I want to thank the tech team, first of all, for putting all of this together so beautifully. And I want to thank all of you once again for coming tonight. For those of you who are used to hearing me speak, you're going to get a chance to see some old friends. You're going to get a chance to rub shoulders with artists who are great, with great famous names. And we've learned over the months and over the years together, in fact, that some of these great artists, for all of their power and all their genius, are also very human. And this entire lecture, focusing on genius and the meaning of genius, is only meaningful to us if we decide to engage in the word not as a spectator, but to decide to draw a little line and to step over that line and to say, I think that I might be able to find a little bit of genius in me, in myself, in you, in someone in your life. Because as long as genius is kept locked away or separate from us, we're spectators. We're in a stadium observing titans at work. Now, this is not to downplay genius. Of course, genius is something that will be discussed and will be quantified by culture and by great people for generations to come. It's a mythological force, genius. People fly on airplanes to other countries to stand in line to see artwork by genius. People pick up books that are heavy and vast because they've been told they've been created by geniuses. I have a question, and it's a true question. How many of you know someone in your life who you might even quietly say is a genius? Does anyone know someone like that? I do. I know a few. You don't like to tell it to them to their face because they either bristle and say, no, or they say, well, of course, where have you been? So either way, you can't win with these people. But what I found is by studying art, I've come into contact with genius, as we will tonight. How many of you in the audience are artists or would call yourself an artist? A good number here in Los Angeles are raising your hand, maybe half of the audience. So we could talk about art and the meaning of art and quality as being a quantifier for genius. But that's not all of it at all. That's only a fraction of it. Genius is something that we're going to try and come to terms with today as it relates to the mind of an artist. We're going to learn some great stories about people. We're going to ask questions, and we're going to be thinking about how these definitions relate to us, to the people in our lives, to you. Genius and the artist's mind. So, the artist's mind. Whenever I'm in the presence of someone who is an engineer, are there any engineers in the audience? There's a few of you, good. Hey, if it weren't for you, we'd all be scrounging around in caves still. The engineers have produced modern civilization and culture. And when I'm in the presence of an engineer, I find myself listening, standing back, listening to their ideas, what excites them, listening to their interpretation of the world. And I know that if I start talking about art, they might look at me the same way too, as sort of a figure to be observed from afar, perhaps. We have a lot in common, engineers and artists. Artists have a lot in common with everyone. But there is a kind of artist mind that I want to try and tell you about. And I experience it as a painter and an artist myself. I'll be driving, as I was driving here today. And I watch the trees pass by, and the trees seem to have a certain height. And the height might deviate from one tree to the next. And I can imagine lines linking the trees together. And I see the asphalt on the road. It has a certain violet quality. It's violet, you know. Asphalt is violet. Sometimes it's a little more periwinkle. Depends on the time of day. And I see that color reflect into the walls of the highway. And I see that color reflect in the shadows of those trees that I saw. And I can see another color, a light pink, emerge in the sky. And that pink is going to bounce off of the blue. And I experience this all the time. I experience it when I'm driving, when I'm at the grocery store, when I'm teaching. I'm experiencing it now, looking at you and the varieties of shadow that I see on your faces. Part of being an artist's mind is being in harmony with this reality, with this tangible reality. And I believe that when people are in harmony with this, it is the equivalent of tasting a meal as opposed to simply chewing and swallowing a meal. It's listening to music and having it impact you at your heart instead of merely having it tap your toe as a response to its beat. So learning to be an artist throughout my life has taught me harmony. It's a harmony of life, a harmony of existence. And the thing that I love about going to a museum, for instance, that's filled with paintings or sculpture, is I can be in the presence of people who've perceived the same kind of harmony. Now this is important because we're all educated people. We don't have time to waste. And frankly, there are great forces of ignorance afoot in the world, as there has always been. And we, I believe, are probably on the side opposed to that ignorance. And we want to taste that food and hear that music in our heart. We want to see those colors resonate. Not just a portion of a picture. Because I think that most people, and we're all learning, most people who have not yet thought of themselves as an artist, who see themselves as a different kind of animal, are only seeing part of a much larger picture. And that part is going to give you glimpses of something. Oh, I see that. I see something there. Wait, it's leaving. It's gone. And while we can continue to examine art and examine life and embrace the experiences of life, this is also going to make art meaningful for us. Because art has a purpose. And it's not to hang on your wall. It's not to decorate your living room. It's not. And it's not to fill museums either. I believe, after years of talking about art, after years of making art, that art is a rehearsal for how we will experience life and death. And it's nothing less. That's what art is at its greatest. It's celebratory. It's a rehearsal for how we might experience life itself. Imagine for a moment that you are a great painter and you're living in Amsterdam in the early years of the 1600s, and you're going to go to a market. And you're trained as an artist, and you see these same colors that I spoke of in the canals reflecting in Amsterdam. You see it in the vegetables in the market. And you decide to venture out and purchase some vegetables for some soup. And you're going to pass by all the vendors. And let's say, in fact, that you're not just any artist, you're Rembrandt. How about that? So Rembrandt, he's a stubby guy. He's not the most handsome guy. He paints himself with a big bulbous nose. Rembrandt, in the early years of the 1600s, is living in a beautiful home, a very beautiful, slender home built up from the street in a very exclusive part of town, the Jewish part of town, where many Jewish merchants are living. In fact, Rembrandt is living right around the corner from the beautiful Sephardic synagogue. It's still there today. You can visit Rembrandt's house. It's a museum. Walk across the street. There's the synagogue. And Rembrandt would have gone down into the market, and Rembrandt would come across someone like this. And he would have said, Guten Morgen, good morning. And the person would engage in a conversation with him about turnips or something. And Rembrandt would be poking around looking at the turnips and, squeezing them and, maybe sniffing some of the vegetables or the fish to see if it's fresh enough. And this woman might begin asking him about some gossip in the art world or wondering about some new furniture he's purchased or how a portrait is going. And Rembrandt is going to be hearing this woman, but as she's talking, Rembrandt is going to be examining the contours of this woman's face. And he's just going to be nodding, and he's going to be examining the location of her eyes, the location of her nostrils. He's going to be taking a look at the curvature of her lips. He's going to be examining the light and shade, these beautiful shapes that are emerging on this woman's face. And he'll be nodding as if he's listening to her the whole time. That's what I do when I'm at the grocery store. And Rembrandt's going to start seeing these shapes, and what he's going to be doing in his mind is he's painting. Just like an engineer might be constructing in his mind a model of an incredible ship or a piece of furniture or a house while they're enjoying a dinner with you across the table. Rembrandt is going to be thinking about structure. Structure. And that's what makes art powerful. Structure, how things hold together. Rembrandt's going to look at this woman and see the structure, and he's going to be painting in his mind. He's going to be examining the planes of her head. Which planes face the light? Which planes face the darkness? Which planes are in transition from the light to the darkness, or from the darkness to the light? This is Rembrandt's life. This is his livelihood. This is his fetish, the thing that excites him. And the woman will continue to blabber on about the cost of fish and what kind of shoes are in fashion that he might want to purchase for his wife. Rembrandt will continue to examine her, and in his mind, Rembrandt's already created a portrait of her, so that when he can go back to his studio, Rembrandt can create her from memory. Or, if he'd like, maybe cause someone to sit for him, and he's examined the light and put that information into his own work. That's what an artist does every minute that they're alive. And we don't want to think for a minute that an artist is separate, because we don't do that. I think you do. I think you do that. I think you're always thinking about the light and the transition into the darkness and the transition out of the darkness again. That's why Rembrandt's genius is so profound. It's a reminder that we have to choose where we stand. Now, geniuses have been discussed in so many books, and you can purchase them. And I was studying them, preparing for this lecture. Genius? I better start reading quickly. I better start knowing a thing or two about what other sociologists, psychologists, and experts have said about genius. There are traits that geniuses have. And these are traits that have been gleaned from many sources that I'm going to share with you tonight. And what I want you to do is not think of it as, well, yes, a genius far away might have this trait. You might be thinking, oh my God, the person I sleep with has these traits. Wow, I never thought of him that way. Or, yeah, I was kind of afraid that that's exactly what was going on in my house. The traits of the artist genius. Here's the traits that I've chosen tonight. Geniuses enjoy a variety of stimulation. A variety. They love to be physical. They love to be mental. They love to engage in history. Geniuses typically also love to engage in languages, in games, in crossword puzzles, in politics, in discussion, an analysis of wine maybe, engines, motors, literature. They travel for that stimulation. Geniuses are filled with varieties of tastes. Throughout the history of art, there are no geniuses who remained isolated without a huge breadth of interests. This is good, because it means that people today who are on computers, on their cell phones, on social media, are being bombarded and stimulated. And perhaps in this way, genius, in some capacity, is also being nurtured across the globe in a new generation of people who, although entertaining themselves, are also being stimulated by a variety of components of life. Geniuses are open to unusual events. If a genius comes upon an unusual circumstance in life, they'll question it, and they'll actually want to sign up for it to learn more. Geniuses are fascinated with new, unusual trends. For all the history they're learning, they're also fascinated by the new interpretation, or a life-changing event. A life-changing event plays a big role in the life of most creative geniuses. Statistically, most of the great geniuses that we could rattle off right now here endured a childhood that had some sort of great loss. The loss of a parent, a divorce, the survival of an illness. This is ironic because most parents in the United States are giving their children violin lessons and soccer lessons and piano lessons. Maybe the genius would be nurtured if there was some other kind of texture in that child's life, something that faces them towards a challenge, I have a friend who is a wonderful painter, and I will say that I believe he is a genius. And I asked him about his childhood, knowing that his father passed away when he was young. And he paused only for a moment and said, "Oh yes, that's what caused me to become an artist, the death of my father." And I said, "Weren't you born with this already?" And he said, "Well, I had it in me. But once my father was gone, I had to do something to forget." And so he painted and he sculpted and he glued little things together. The same could be said for many great geniuses in history. Life was not always a childhood of magic and roses and full spoons of porridge. A fluidity of habits is important. What does this mean? A genius, you'd think, would be involved in structure. Every day is the same kind of day. But it seems that geniuses actually can change their habits if necessary. Here's an example. Leonardo da Vinci. We can't go through a lecture without mentioning Leonardo da Vinci because we think of him as a great genius. Leonardo da Vinci was working in Milan for the Duke of Milan, and he had a great job in the Renaissance. He was creating beautiful pieces of art. He had a lot of leisure time. And then one day the French army came, and they destroyed the palace. They destroyed his artwork. Leonardo da Vinci had to flee. He goes to Venice, to Italy, far away from Milan, and he has to start over. He has to start handing his business card around to try and get some work from the Doge. He has to produce new work habits. He has to start promoting his paintings on the street. If Leonardo da Vinci had to do that, then it's a reminder that we can do it too. To change our habits, to be fluid in our habits, to transform if necessary. I want you to think about transformation a lot during this lecture because, as you know, if you hear me speak, transformation is very key to all of this. Change. It's all about change, isn't it? Just when we think it's very peaceful and settled, things change, people change, circumstances change. And it seems that genius can thrive with change. Geniuses can also engage in multiple activities. There's not one single magnum opus being created. There's a number of magnum opuses, a number of different ideas put to use at the same time, or different, a way of retreating from one habit and going towards another habit. Again, change and transformation. The scariest things for us are what geniuses thrive on, and the ability to be alone. This is really hard. But it seems that geniuses enjoy the walk down the street alone. Geniuses alone are able to perceive their own ideas with more clarity. Geniuses alone can have a dialogue with themselves. And geniuses are able to then fight their own demons, their monsters, or to listen to the muses that might come into their life. If you know someone who you suspect is a genius, you know what I mean? That they really are okay with that aloneness. In fact, they might even ask for it sometimes. To be alone. That's a powerful component. No matter how the genius might be very social, might engage a whole room of friends and family, the genius is going to appreciate when they leave so that they can hear their voices again with clarity. And the exploration of multiple points of view. A genius is going to take a look at an idea and say, I wonder what it's going to look like from over here. I wonder if I move over here, how it's going to look. What if I get down real low and look up? What's that going to be like? This is not a spectator sport. And when life changes, we had better be able to examine it from a different point of view so that we can cope. But a genius is going to see it as an opportunity. Now today we're going to look at some art. We're going to examine artists and their work, and we're going to see how some of these traits manifest in these masterpieces. I don't want to talk theoretically. I want to show examples. Here's a huge component to being a genius: the fetishization of something. You know what this means? to be obsessed with something to the point where it's almost a magical connection, a non-stop connection with something that gives the genius power. And again, when I say genius, I ain't talking about Leonardo. I'm talking about you and that person in your life. What is it that you love? If you don't know, you need to quiet yourself and trust what's coming. I want you to do something with me right now. Please do this. I want you to hold out one of your hands, and I want you to imagine in your hands that you have some clay. And this is not a strange moment for you because you spend all day with clay in your hands. And you're rubbing that clay and you're molding it. You're creating in your mind a body part of a human being with that clay. Do that for me, please. Do it, really. Massage the clay. It's not weird. Some of you are very good at it, I can see. Very good. Massaging that body part. Yeah, this is what one of the great geniuses in art did every day. He walked around with clay in his hand and created little body parts all day, all day. That was his fetish. You know what it was? Tactility, to touch something, to touch something. That was that artist's fetish. That's what they loved. You've got to figure out what you love. I know what the tech guys in the back love. They love putting things together. They love technology. I saw them doing it today. Making all of this happen. Getting wires and gear in their hands and putting it together to construct something, to reach thousands of people around the globe with this lecture series. What is it that you love? That's your fetish. And we're going to talk about that today too. The thing that you draw energy from. The thing that turns you on. That's part of genius. And ultimately, being a genius is discovering systems. A system. How do things work? How do things work? Geniuses aren't about chaos and calamity. They could be if they find a system that relates to the chaos. Right? And some people can do that. They can find a system that relates to chaos. Geniuses find systems. What are systems? Series of reliable events. Events that can be counted on. Harmony. The way things work together. Let's examine some of this. One of the first great Renaissance thinkers, although we think of Leonardo da Vinci again, no. One of the first great thinkers of the Renaissance was Alberti. Leon Battista Alberti. He lived from 1404 to 1472. He was known as the first universal man. Someone with a variety of interests. He was interested in writing. He was an author, an artist, an architect, a lawyer, a linguist, a musician, a poet, philosopher. He was a priest, and he was also a great athlete. It's said that he could take a javelin, and he could stand on one side of the dome of Santa Maria de Fiore in Florence, and he could stand back and he could shoot that javelin right over the dome, and people watched him do it. He could do everything. He was attractive to everyone. And what obsesses him, of course, is systems, how things work together. He's the creator of what we call today the Renaissance. He puts together systems, the universal man. The work of art, according to Alberti, is constructed so that it is impossible to take anything away from it or add anything to it without lessening the whole. Beauty was for Alberti the harmony of all the parts in relationship from one to the other. How many of you cook? Raise your hand. Good, lots of hands raised. How many of you never cook and you wait for someone else to do it? Lots of hands too. Good. Well, those of you who are doing the cooking know that you've got to plan a meal perhaps, put things together. You might wing it at the last minute, but you could also plan it. You could understand how the tastes are going to work together, the textures, maybe even the color of the linen, the wine that's going to pair with it. the juice, the desserts, the silverware. If you're one of those people that is that concerned about that presentation, there's a little bit of genius in you. There is, because you're interested in harmony and you're interested in systems. And those are two requirements. Alberti was one of these people. He must have been an incredible person to be around, intimidating, but also inspiring as well. He writes, and this is a translation, this is realized in a particular number, proportion, and arrangement demanded by harmony. Mathematics. Raise your hand if you do not love math. Raise your hand. You do not love math. Raise your hand if you love math. Good, yeah, almost as many people, all right? So I did not love math when I was young. There came a time where math and I were not friends. We didn't speak for a number of years. I then became more friendly with math by studying painting, by studying the Italian Renaissance. Alberti was someone who realized that there's one thing you can't argue with, and that's math. You can't argue with it. That's a reliable system. So Alberti begins to imagine mathematical equations and proportions as being the definition of beauty. What else? He writes 2 books on it. His books outline these ideas of beauty, mathematics, proportion, harmony. The books are not widely read today, but they're known by everyone in art history. Artists and architects were reading them in the Renaissance. It was a required reading. The first book is called Della Pittura, which means on painting. On painting. He's going to tell you how to paint. He's figured it out. And he has. And this is a time in the Renaissance, in the 1400s, where humanity is awakening from the Dark Ages, from forgotten techniques and forgotten laws, forgotten aesthetics of beauty, forgotten languages. And Alberti says, oh, don't worry, I'm here to help resurrect all of that for you. He writes about painting. Artists must learn a framework of proportion, he writes. Perspective, he writes, so that their figures are correctly drawn and rendered as believable. Next, it's important to arrange these figures in such a way that they relate to each other, they correlate to each other. The purpose of all of this is unity and to convey a moral. And a moral is a lesson about what is good versus bad. And this is what art was about. Balance, harmony, and goodness. Are we living in an era that embraces balance, harmony, and goodness? Not necessarily. They exist, yes, but perhaps they're not as embraced as they were in the little town of Florence during the Renaissance. A moral purpose. Alberti stresses that the artist's struggle to achieve fame was also practical, and it was a good idea as long as they didn't do any shenanigans. Keep on the up and up. Don't do anything shoddy. Keep your technical abilities going. Find solutions that are not superficial. But to him, the real artist was dealing not with fame, but dealing with the concept of math. And he began to create charts describing how the human body related to perfection because it relates to math. I don't know if we're living in a time where children or anyone of any age is told that we relate to perfection anymore. In fact, maybe it's the opposite. We're told that our body is the wrong type, our weight is wrong, our choices have been wrong, our eating habits have been wrong. There's someone trying to tell us that we can change all that through joining a gym, joining a diet, changing our life in some way, changing our relationships in some way. In the Renaissance, it was very different. In the Renaissance, it was believed for the first time in almost 1,000 years, it was believed that humans were good. That humans were good. And that wasn't an idea that had been entertained since the fall of Rome. And Alberti proved it by showing that the human figure related to math. And because math was a system that could be relied upon, and because math related to the human figure, then the human figure was good. Humans were good. And they could learn new scientific applications to prove it. They could construct cities based on the proportions of a human figure. Now, all of this constitutes ideas that Leonardo da Vinci grabbed a hold of and utilized in his great masterworks. But there are other artists who grabbed this as well, other artists who would employ this in the most delicate, poetic, and powerful ways. And of course, they needed patronage. Patronage would be inspired by his second book, De Re Edificatoria. The art of building would provide wealthy patrons with a way to tap in to perfection. And that was to build a palazzo based on mathematical geometry. Perfection. That's what a leader wants. That's what a patron wants. The art of building was embraced by Lorenzo the Magnificent, Lorenzo de' Medici. Lorenzo de' Medici is one of the first great leaders of the Renaissance. He's a statesman. He himself is a poet. He loves the art so much that he opens an art school in his home. It would be the equivalent of our president, President Obama, opening up an art school on the grounds of the White House, a specialized group of students only allowed on the grounds. Lorenzo the Magnificent meets little Michelangelo, and he sees him sculpting and invites him to be part of the school. That's how Michelangelo grows his career. Lorenzo the Magnificent will rule in Florence for 14 years, from 1478 to 1492. During this time, he's going to have access to one of the greatest artists of all time, one of the greatest thinkers of all time. Not only Leonardo and Michelangelo, but Sandro Botticelli. Raise your hand here in Los Angeles if you know the work of Sandro Botticelli. Many hands raised. You'll see it and you'll recognize it right away, of course. Sandro Botticelli is spending time in the Palazzo of the Medicis. And the way I see it, he's a good boy, he's a good kid, he's young, he's very sweet. And a lot of the patrons in the Medicis would have been involved perhaps in a dance or music festival. There would have been wild boar, and there would have been wine, and they would have been drinking. They would have said, Sandro, come here, come here. Come over here, Sandro. Come here. We've got a question for you. We want you to paint something, Sandro. We don't want a painting of the Virgin Mary. You know, we love the Virgin Mary, but we've got plenty of paintings of her. We want something more pagan, Sandro. You know what I mean? Something a little more fleshy, something that's got a little more flesh. That's it. This is how the conversation was. Exactly, I just know it. Maybe not exactly, but the idea would have come across and they would have said, we're going to pay you to do this. We want to see some pagan imagery. We're surrounded by sacred imagery. We want something pagan. And so Sandro Botticelli is going to create one of the first great pagan pieces of art of the Renaissance, the Primavera, okay, springtime. He didn't name it Primavera. That was the naming of an art critic named Giorgio Vasari, who had to give it some kind of a name. But it means springtime. It's created in 1482. It's beautiful. People fly all over the world to Florence to see this. But there's more to it than what we see with our eyes. First of all, here is a number of figures. They have nothing to do with sacred religion. They have something very much to do with paganism. There are three figures here dancing, and their clothes are luminous. We can see their flesh through the clothes. This is something you would never see in real life. You'd only see this if you were privy to a very private dance given to you by very intimate people in your life. But to see this is showing us that we're privy to the divine figure, the figure that is good, even if they're dressed like this. And then here in the center of the painting, there's a figure that relates to not the Virgin Mary, but the earth, an earth goddess. Gala, the earth goddess. She, instead of having a halo, has a kind of aura created by the trees themselves, which have opened up. Above her, it's little baby Cupid. You got to watch out for baby Cupid, right? He flies around, and he's got a bow and arrow, and if he shoots you through the heart, you fall in love. He's the love child of Venus and Mars, the god of war. So he's involved in love like his mom, and he's got sharp weapons like his dad. Little baby Cupid. And he's right up above the earth goddess here. Over to the side, we see a figure relating to Mercury. It's actually an homage to Lorenzo de' Medici's brother, who was assassinated. And Botticelli said, don't worry, I'll paint him in as one of the gods. It'll be a way to remember him. Over here, it's Flora, the goddess of gardens and flowers. Flora. Well, Florence gets its name from flowers. She's the patron goddess of the city of Florence. Her dress is covered with flowers. Beside her is another nude figure, Clorice. Clorice is a beautiful nymph. She's described by Ovid as a beautiful woman who runs through the forest, and when she opens her mouth to sing, flowers come out, and she spreads the landscape with flowers. And you can go home and see this in greater detail. The flowers emerging from her mouth. She's being grabbed by a blue figure. It's Zephyrus, the winds, winter. She gets away because it's springtime. It's time to spread the flowers. All of this is about one word, the word that begins with an F, fertility. It's all about fertility. This is pagan fertility. This is a word that will not be spoken of in good company in the Renaissance. But the Medicis have the power and the money to produce this private painting for their palazzo. But there's something else, something much more important than all of this. What does it involve? It involves a dance, movement. It's the dance of these beautiful figures, the three graces. The dance would involve music, and the music would involve beats and measures, and that is math. The Birth of Venus, which we'll see in a moment, another painting based upon math. Sandro Botticelli loves math because math is perfection. Math relates to the human body. And again, for the first time in hundreds of years, the human body is seen as good. Look what's going on in this painting. It's divided. There's a section here with 2 units. It can be measured by 2 units. And then here is a section that contains 4 units. And it's followed by a section that contains 3 units. We could also see this as a waltz, as a piece of music. And that's exactly what Alberti, in his book about painting, demanded artists do, to see their artwork as visual music, as rhythms. But there's more. Because once you see these divisions, you're also going to see more divisions. Here's a beautiful one, shooting right up from the foot of this grace, right along her elbow, touching the outstretched hand of the earth goddess, and finally, the hand clutching the bow of Cupid. In other words, these good body parts all align in harmony. Over to the other side, we see a line on the foot of the first grace, and it's going to touch it, go up her leg, follow the leg perfectly, right past her womb, past her flesh, touching through her breast, going right along her lips, her eyes, up into the fruit trees ahead. And here, this division also touches a foot. It rises up through the womb of Flora, through her womb, because this is about fertility. And it goes also along the side of her face, touching her lip and her eye. No placement of body part is accidental. Every placement of body part relates to mathematics. There's more lines here. We're watching every line that emerges in this image correspond to the tilt of figures or to key points in the plane. All of it based on triangles. Now, triangles are a powerful shape. Try knocking a pyramid over. Very hard to do. It's flat on the bottom. You can't knock down a pyramid. Botticelli here is utilizing these pyramidal shapes in order to create perfect harmony and structure throughout the painting. All divided musically through these rhythms which Alberti recommended for the visual artist of the day. In other words, a painting that's about sensuality, fertility, dance, is also based on the perfection of numbers. And this is why Botticelli is a genius. Because if he only dealt with the perfection of numbers, we'd have a grid. And if he only dealt with the diaphanous quality of the cloth and the flesh and the fertility, we'd have erotica. But the two together, it's the best of everything. Harmony. Line after line relating to perfect correspondence, perfect harmony. Now, of course, if he did it once, it would be considered a fluke, but he does it again, and that means it's part of his fetish. He understands how to combine all of these sensual components with the components of math. You know this painting, right? The Birth of Venus by Botticelli. How many of you have seen this painting in person? Good. Most of us in Los Angeles have seen it. If you haven't seen it, it's waiting for you. It's in Florence, in the Uffizi Gallery. One of the great paintings of the world. Well, one of the first things I see when I look at this painting is, once again, flesh. There's no Virgin Mary going on here. This is the pagan goddess Venus, the goddess of love. She is arising from the sea on a shell. How did she get there? Well, Zeus, who will become the leader of the sky god, will have a battle with his father, Kronos, the god of time. It's father and son battling each other to the end. Zeus pulls out a knife, castrates his dad. He wins by default. The dad screams, falls, and Zeus tosses his father's genitals into the sea. The genitals boil and bubble, and up from the genitals emerges the goddess of love, Venus. It could happen, you know. And look, she's come in on a shell, and she is showing a little bit of humility because she's covering up her private parts with her beautiful golden hair. Here's the zephyrs again, the winds coming in, blowing her into shore, and a maiden is saying, "Girl, get some clothes on." So we know this painting very well. And the first thing that's exciting is to see that Venus has this beautiful contrapposto, this counter pose that's describing movement. And instead of us having a straight line, we have a line now that is angled. And this is going to make all the difference in the painting, because an angled line has movement. It's not static. It's describing movement and action. It's describing transformation. She's transforming from the depths of the sea to a goddess of love. Watch the lines emerge. You can see them even without being told that they're there, these divisions. The lines lining up with the zephyrs. The line from the axis of the beautiful Venus heading up towards the division, separating this half of the painting from the top. Over to the other side, we begin to see the perfect triangle created by the body and the movement and arc of her attendant, again, meeting at the apex above Venus. It seems like simple stuff, and I'm going to tell you why it's important. This is someone who is trying to make sense of a turbulent world. This is someone living in the Renaissance, trying to find order. But let me ask you something. Is your life always in the kind of order that Sandro Botticelli would have hoped for? No. Your life isn't. And now we're not talking about art. You understand? We're talking about our lives. And if someone like Sandro Botticelli can come up with a way to create harmony or balance with his piece of art, what he's doing, as I said, was rehearsing for life. Because painting isn't designed to simply decorate a hallway or fill a museum. It's a rehearsal for life and for transformation and for death, and nothing less. Sandro Botticelli is trying to create order in a world that is filled with war and chaos and superstition. Once you leave the walls of Florence, all bets are off. This is a painting about perfection. And this would not have been done accidentally. Do you agree? that there's no way that someone is going to devote so much time to painting feet and breasts and long golden locks and accidentally create it so that it's mathematically balanced. That's a conscious choice. This goes back to our trait of a genius: multiple interests. The interest of flesh and light, sensuality, and the interest of math and music. That's Botticelli. That's the Renaissance. Anything by Leonardo is going to build on Botticelli's achievements here. In fact, we could say that the great artists of the Renaissance could not have even begun a painting if they didn't have geometry. Unlike painters today, we wouldn't just start by swiping paint on the canvas because we feel that way. No, the artists of the Renaissance would begin with math and then work outward. Here, this beautiful painting of a Christian theme, the Madonna and little Saint John the Baptist as a child and little baby Jesus, is actually a pyramid in disguise. That's all it is. And this is why Raphael was such a genius. He could get rid of the heavy grids and he could start to produce design based on simplicity. Shapes. Now I'm going to tell you how I started to learn about shapes, because I sure wasn't born looking at them. I was fortunate that I had an instructor, Saul Bernstein, who I talk about in my lectures. Saul Bernstein was my professor. He was my mentor at the time. He was very charismatic. He had hundreds of people following him around, everyone trying to get into his lectures and his classes. Saul Bernstein had a very simple bit of advice. He said, take a book, take some tracing paper, and find some paintings you like and start tracing some of the shapes and just see what comes out. And it was very inspiring for an art student like me who was trying to find his way in the art world. Saul produced some incredible examples of hidden shapes in the work of the great masters. And out of respect for his discoveries, I'm not going to include any of them tonight. There's no need to, because I've found many of my own based on his advice. And this goes to show that he was right. It wasn't just a few quirky artists. Turns out some of the greatest artists in all of Western history did this habitually. It was their habit to deal with shapes. And not just shapes, but repetition in order to convey an idea. Repetition is very powerful. How many of you have heard the great speech by Martin Luther King? It's the I Have a Dream speech. I have a dream, says this great humanitarian. And he'll follow it up with a wish. I have a dream, he repeats again, with another wish. I have a dream, Martin Luther King says again, followed up by another wish. It's repetition. And it's the repetition that will sell ding-dongs and cupcakes on TV commercials. It will sell Beatles songs. How many times do the Beatles sing Hey Jude at the end of Hey Jude? Over and over again. Repetition is a powerful tool. Well, the great masters knew this. And I want to share with you some of these ideas. Now, if you've been in my lectures and you've seen some of these ideas, you're with good friends. If this is new for you, this could blow your mind. This is a completely different way of going to a museum. I'm going to show you things today that I've never read in a book, things that have never been brought to my attention by any mentor, instructor, any dissertation. These are discoveries I made with a piece of tracing paper and a pencil, the way Saul Bernstein, my mentor, taught me to do. And we're going to start by looking at the work of Artemisia Gentileschi. Why is she so important? She's one of the first powerful Florentine painters who is a female. She's going to be working in Rome. She's going to be creating images for the church. She's going to be deeply involved in her craft. Part of it is because of her father, Orazio Gentileschi. It helps if you have a father painter in the Renaissance, because women were not encouraged to be artists themselves. So she had an in. Artemisia Gentileschi also has a personal experience which will change her life. This will become her fetish, her power source. Artemisia Gentileschi is given a tutor by her father, and this tutor betrays their relationship and rapes her. Artemisia gentiless, she endures this at a time where women were given no recourse to the law. She goes to trial. Her father refuses to let it pass. He calls the rapist to task. All the transcripts of the trial still exist. They can be read. She was tortured. She was put through examinations designed to humiliate her and break her. She didn't break. The rapist was given time in jail. He served some time and was out. But she harbored within her this concept of a woman being able to fight back and a woman being able to stand on her own feet in a culture that did not allow that to occur. And so she devotes her life to images of powerful women. This is Judith and her maidservant from 1612. And it's from a scene describing the story of Judith and Holofernes. Judith, who is a powerful Jewish woman, sneaks into the tent of Holofernes, seduces him a bit. He's drunk. She has different plans, though, than he does. As soon as he collapses in a stupor, she pulls out a sword, and he is decapitated. And she takes his head in a basket with her maidservant. And why this basket is so powerful, she's going to use it to sneak it out of the camp and then expose the head of the foe to the Hebrew people. She's going to be a heroine. There's, by the way, nobody with this kind of chutzpah in the Christian New Testament. Yeah, all the women in the Christian New Testament, they don't wield swords, but a number of them do. In the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, and in various stories related to the Hebrew culture, women are exceedingly powerful. Well, here's my thesis, here's my idea. A great artist is going to take that one prop, the one prop that tells the story the best, and will repeat that prop, that shape, that line over and over and over again, like Martin Luther King would do hundreds of years later during his famous I Have a Dream speech. You repeat it over and over to make your point. Make sense? Judith and her maidservant. What is that great prop? Well, I'm going to say that it's the basket. That's what she's cradling the head in. It's here. You can see it. This basket at the corner of the painting. Now, what I'm going to challenge you to do, some of you have seen this already in my lectures, some of you are seeing this for the first time. Without me showing you, can you find the curve of the basket repeated anywhere in this painting? Good. I see a lot of people tracing in the air. Yeah, you might see it in the sash. You might see it in the hat. I've outlined a few of these places. I'm going to show you where I found one. First of all, we have the basket itself. The basket itself outlined in red. There it is with the head. It's repeated by the bottom of the basket. It's repeated again in the sash of the maidservant. It's repeated again in the curvature of the maidservant's hem. It's repeated again in the curvature of the maidservant's collar. It's repeated again at the top of the collar. It's repeated again at the maidservant's wrapped around her head. It's repeated again with Judith's collar. It's repeated again with Judith's crown. It's repeated again with the hilt of the sword, and so on and so on. That's genius. And genius is different than just knowing how to paint a face so it looks real. And genius is different than just flying a brush around and flinging paint, or sculpting because you feel like it. Genius involves systems of communication. I love it. I love her for this. And she doesn't just do it once, she'll do it in other paintings as well. Another of the great artists working around the same time in the era of the Baroque in the 1600s, so long ago, Peter Paul Rubens, one of my favorite painters. Peter Paul Rubens is from Antwerp. Peter Paul Rubens is a genius because of his technical ability, his way to launch his career, his ability to produce incredible images. He's dashing, he's handsome, he's rich. Peter Paul Rubens is one of the first artists who is knighted for his services to royalty. And he has a certain flair about him. Everything has a Rubens flair, kind of a swirly flair. Even his mustache has the flair. Peter Paul Rubens. Let's look at some Peter Paul Rubens. Peter Paul Rubens is asked to produce an image of Christ on the cross. He's in a Catholic nation. Peter Paul Rubens paints this Jewish man, this teacher, who is put on trial and crucified, who will be the seed of the cult of Christianity, which will grow to become the religion of Christianity. And he has a choice to make, and one of his choices is whether to paint Jesus as a sad, beaten down, decrepit weakling, or as a superhero. And he chooses the superhero. And so he produces an image of this guy being raised up on a cross, and his arms not out like this, but like this, triumphant. And it takes an army of men to rise him up. That's how powerful he is. But what Rubens did here is amazing. Forget about all these figures for a minute. Forget about the story for a minute. Look at the math. It's a beautiful, perfect triangle on either side, both the central piece and the arms of this triptych. And you can combine additional triangles into the ropes and the arms of these men, and we see that Peter Paul Rubens is really an abstract painter. What's written on this little sign above the cross? It's written in 3 languages. The Romans put it there. It was sort of a jab, like a little joke. It says, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, which of course they refuted. Everyone was refuting it at the time. My little daughter saw this when I was putting this together a few years ago. I'm looking at these triangles, looking at the math, and my little daughter climbs up on my lap, and she says, Papa, look, it's a crown. Rubens is creating a crown. It's not just math for the sake of math. It's math that creates triangles, that creates an image of something that a king would wear on his head. Jesus got a crown of thorns. The church would later believe that truly he was a king. This is Rubens using hidden imagery to convey his ideas. If Rubens used imagery like this only once, it would be a fluke. But he'll use it over and over again. Later on in the story, Jesus dies, and Jesus is removed from the cross, and he's put into a hole in the ground, a depression into the ground, a tomb. And so instead of lines shooting upward in triumph, we see a depression created over and over again. The depression starts at the top of the painting as these figures remove the body of their teacher from this torture device. A whole painting filled with Jews who are confronting the death of their teacher. Depression after depression after depression. It's a huge abstract painting based on the depression, not only in the mood of these people, but the depression in the earth that the body would be laid. That's genius, because it involves systems. This is how I go to museums. One of my favorite here in Pasadena, the Norton Simon Museum, David and Goliath. David, who will become the great king, has lobbed a rock to hit the Goliath's helmet, and he's injured. He falls to the ground. This giant has fallen, and David pulls out a sword and will chop his head off. Another beheading. It happens a lot in these sacred books. Rubens is a genius, though, because what Rubens wants to do is show movement. He doesn't want to show someone frozen forever. He wants to show movement. So he's going to show that sword moving through the air, moving throughout the painting. We see the sword move back. Watch what he's going to do. He's going to show where the sword will go. The sword's going to move through the air in the clouds. He hides where the sword will go. Through the arm, he hides where the sword will be. Through the hilt of the sword, there's a series of lines emerging in the weather behind him, all describing the motion, all the way down through the army, down to the foot, which leads to the wound on Goliath's head, through the hand clutching the fallen weapon, all the way back to the foot. It's a pinwheel. It's motion. He's describing not a frozen moment, but a full swing. And you know what Rubens is doing now, which gets me so excited? Rubens is conveying time. It's not a frozen moment. He's conveying time, the passage of time. And he's conveying space The movement of something through space. Do you know what that is? That's the fourth dimension. Peter Paul Rubens, who didn't know of such a thing, in the 1600s, was painting the fourth dimension of time and space. That's what genius is. To try some new ideas, a new variety of approaches, new ways of communicating, new systems. And Rubens' fetish, well, he's got two. One is movement, another is flesh. He always allows the flesh and the muscles to excite us while he's describing the movement. Rubens isn't good for action paintings alone, you know. He's also good for very powerful paintings. Behold, a painting which was given to the crowns of Europe by Peter Paul Rubens. We see a figure dressed in black. It's Europe, Europa. She's mourning. A beautiful pillar behind her with an angel holding a globe representing the world. There's Venus, the goddess of love, tugging at her man, Mars. Stop it, stop it. And what is he doing? He's trampling on literature and music. His sword is out. Humanity is fallen. He's the god of war. This is the first anti-war painting in Western culture, created deliberately by Peter Paul Rubens. And he would have displayed it and discussed these ideas in the painting to his patrons. At the bottom of the painting, here is a figure who holds calipers, the tools of an architect. Musical instruments, literature, babies and mothers, all in danger of being crushed by war. The consequences of war, 1635, in the Palazzo Pitti in Italy. This is what's incredible about this painting. This is what blows me away. When you think of culture, when you think of civilization, I think of one thing, and that thing is a column. A column. A column holds up a temple. It's part of the architecture of our Greek traditions. And here's a column right here at the far left of the painting. Beneath the column, a little baby holding a globe. That represents the world. And as we know, this painting is about the destruction of civilization. So we can see that column nice and straight here. And what Rubens is going to do is he's going to take that line, and right before our very eyes, Rubens is going to topple that column. Rubens is going to topple civilization. The lines go right through the arms of Europa. She pleads for help. It goes through the lines of the little figures, the angels, the cupids. It goes along the line of Venus, the goddess of love. It goes along the line as she reaches out towards Mars. It follows Mars right up to his shield, right along the side of death and disharmony here. Follows the fallen group of civilians, all the way down, lining up their bodies, their backs, their heads, their feet, the storms in the sky. And the figure fallen at the bottom will give us the final lines describing the outcome of civilization. It's an incredible abstract painting. Isn't that incredible? Peter Paul Rubens is a genius because he's found a system, a way to tell a story using sign language. This is another great master, John Vermeer. John Vermeer is known as a great master, and there's a wonderful movie called Tim's Vermeer that describes a way that Vermeer perhaps created his images using mirrors. The Astronomer by Vermeer describes a globe, the tool of the astronomer with the celestial bodies embossed on it. I'm going to say again that a great genius will pick one idea and will repeat that idea over and over again. The idea, instead of the basket that Holofernes held, will be the globe. Let's see if the globe is repeated throughout the painting. Here's the globe itself. Here's the globe repeated in the background. Some of you are seeing different globes already. Where else do we see the globe? I know. What about the head, the mind of the astronomer himself? Where else do we see a circle? Well, I see a very interesting circle created down here. I see a larger circle created down at the bottom in the drapes. I see a large circle in the center of the painting created by the curvature of the arm. That's genius. That's abstract painting 400 years before abstraction became popular. That's genius. Now, if Vermeer was using mirrors to create his paintings, it means he also would have been thoughtful about how he set up the folds, the negative space, the drapery, anything to tell that story. If he does it once, it's me being crazy finding it. But he does it again. This time it's called The Geographer, 1668. This time, the globe's been put away up at the top. What other toys do we have? Calipers. That's what geographers and engineers are using. The little metal calipers are in his hand. That's the prop that's there. Do we see that repeated anywhere else in the painting? Yes, we see it. It's repeated here along the window. It's repeated in the shoulder. It's repeated in the drapery in the windowsill. It's repeated throughout the drapery and the folds, over and over again. The top corner of the furniture and the shoulder. The light and shade, all containing that idea repeated. Harmony. Harmony. And there's more. There's 24 more in this painting. We can keep finding them over and over and over again. That's genius. That's systems. Let's look at Nicolas Poussin. Nicolas Poussin is a French artist. He's known for structure. Nicolas Poussin is known for clarity. He doesn't monkey around. Look at his self-portrait. Does he look like a guy who monkeys around? No! He's very serious. Look what he's done. He's got those frames lining right along his eyes. He's watching you. It's like this. I'm watching you. Nicolas Poussin is an incredible seer. But he does something that's so brilliant. He decides to create an image that relates to the Jewish people. Israelites gathering manna in the desert, 1637, in the Louvre. We see a field filled with Israelites. They have no food. Where's our food? How are we going to eat, they ask. Moses is in the center of the painting. His hand is up. We'll get food, he says. God will provide. And manna appears, manna from heaven. In some stories, the manna just appears in the landscape. In other stories, it falls like rain. And so the people are gathering manna. They're gathering it in their baskets, in their clothes. This gentleman here can't believe it. There's so much manna coming from heaven. I looked at this painting for years thinking, it's so beautiful. It's such a wonderful painting describing the human story. Hey, what's with the weird rock formation? That's really weird. Why would someone who's so into structure and perfection provide such a strange anomaly in the landscape? We see an arch with kind of a nick in one side, which is disrupting the continuity of the arch. And I have to tell you, and you may be in the audience, one of my students who is reading Hebrew said, I think I recognize that rock. That rock is not just a rock. Hi. Hey, sorry, hey. Hey is used as a writing out of the names for the divine creator. Hey is used as a symbol of the creator itself. Why put a random rock in your painting when you can put God in your painting instead? An arch with a nick. It's hay. Do you agree? If it's not, it's Poussin goofing around with rock formations for no purpose. And it makes sense. This is one of the only paintings he creates in his career that deals with the Israelites. To include an alphabet form, hey, into his painting. This is genius. So what we're learning too is that geniuses do things that have meaning. It's not a waste of time. Geniuses do things that have impact, that are designed to communicate. Jean-Baptiste Simon Chardin, one of the great painters from France as well. One of my favorite examples. Go to the Louvre. Here's his painting, The Ray. It consists of a butcher shop window with a stingray held up for purchase. There's a kitty cat who's walked in, who's going to munch on it, or is freaked out by the oysters, one or the other. There's also earthenware, knives and spoons here. Chardin does what we've seen done before. What's one shape over and over that you see? The diamond, right. The diamond that relates to the ray. Forget about all of this gobbledygook. The thing that's powerful about this painting is the geometry. The ray repeated in the tail, back, corner of the plate, and then repeated once again on the other side of the painting with the arrangement of the knife and the utensil, 3 diamonds. It's simple. It's so simple it's almost stupid. It's a game. And that's why I think these guys were geniuses. They were beyond the idea of just painting kitty cats and fish. They were beyond the idea of painting naked women. They were beyond the idea of painting interiors. They were looking for something simpler, something richer, the harmony of the world. Jean-Honoré Fragonard, another French painter who we can find in the Louvre, his fetish, flesh. Yummy, juicy flesh. Like Rubens, he's in love with flesh and he's in love with movement. And when we think of the female form, we think of the curve. And so this entire painting is going to be constructed out of one shape over and over again. It's the curve. You take one idea, you repeat it over and over again. In the trees, in the drapery, in the bodies, in the limbs, in the flesh, in the clouds, in the water, over and over again. Fragonard will do this in so many paintings. The museums are filled with thousands of artists. Do you know how many artists do what I'm showing you? Less than 20. And they're all artists whose names are considered the names of some of the greats of all time. 20 artists will do this habitually. Saul Bernstein, my teacher, used to say to me, if you know that this is what geniuses do, are you going to do it? Or are you just not going to do it? John Singer Sargent, one of my favorite painters. Sargent has an opportunity to go to Spain. He's an American painter. He goes to Sevilla in the south of Spain and he hears flamenco dancers. He goes to the caves to hear flamenco. Here's the shouting and the strumming of guitars, the shouts of "Olé" in the back. All of this is called el jaleo. It means the noise. And the noise is designed to bring the dancer to a kind of fever pitch. After staying in Sevilla, Sargent returns home to Paris, where he creates this masterpiece. It'll win the first prize in the Salon this year. 1882, El Jaleo, at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Here we are at the foot of a stage. And the dancer comes by, swinging her arms, moving across the stage. Imagine the rhythm of her feet, the rhythm of the guitars, the shouts, "Olé, olé, El Jaleo," the noise. And Sargent is thinking, how do I tie all this together? How do I make all this chaos make sense? What's the one shape that ties it all together? The guitar, the guitar, the guitar. And he shows us the guitar right here. He shows us 2 of them very clearly. Just like Vermeer showed the globe and Vermeer showed the calipers, Sargent shows the guitar. Could we find the guitar hidden in the painting? Yes. I'll show you where I see it. First of all, here are our 2 guitars. It's 2 circles with a long neck. That's your guitar. Where else do we see 2 circles? 2 circles, one atop the other. 2 circles, one atop the other. How about right here? There's another guitar. There's another one next to it. Good, so we have 4 guitars, totally intact guitars. Where's 2 more circles? One atop the other, one atop the other. How about here? Let's see that again. Guitar, 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 guitar. Whoa, how about here? The shadow of the man's hat forming 2 circles, and his nose and shirt forming the neck. How about here? Let's see that again. Because remember, the more you repeat that shape, the more the viewer's brain will perceive harmony. How about that? The dancer herself, with her arm outstretched, the bulge of her sleeve, the bulge of her shoulder forming the guitar. That's genius. Sargent does it again on 2 other major paintings, proving it's not just a fluke. Edgar Degas. Edgar Degas is one of the greatest artists We know him for his ballet dancers. Edgar Degas lives from 1837 to 1917. He's one of the French Impressionists. Edgar Degas comes from a wealthy family, but his love for art ultimately will bring him less and less riches. He'll be spending the last years of his life in a certain kind of barely existence and poverty. Edgar Degas produces one of my favorite paintings, The Cabaret Singer, this beautiful painting of a singer. And what does a singer do? What does a singer do? Sings. Good. A singer sings. And he wants to show that. He's going to the cabarets of Paris. He's sitting right beneath the singer, and the singer will raise her hand and will sing. Oh! And all of that air is coming out, up and out. And so Degas will take that arm to remind us the direction that the air is coming. He'll take these stripes of color to remind us of all that expulsion of sound. What's the symbol of a singer? Who can tell me the symbol of a singer? A mouth, an open mouth. She's got it. What Degas did, I believe, is incredible. Degas takes that open mouth and he says, I wonder how many circles I can find that echo that mouth. I see the head first, exuding the sound. I get closer to the mouth. I see this large darkness with tinges of white, that's the teeth, and the red lips. Where else do I see something round with tinges of white and red? The ear. And it makes sense because we hear sound. We hear sound, we hear that echo. And so if this is the mouth, if this is the key, notice how he's also made the head of the singer a beautiful roundness instead of angular. The ear is a repetition of that kind of roundness. So are the eye sockets themselves, one after another. 4 mouths are better than one. That's genius. Edgar Degas will do this over and over again in portraits. Find it yourself. Go home, get a Degas book, get some tracing paper, and have fun. Discover it. One of his great sculptures, The Little Dancer of 14 years, only sculpture that he exhibited in his life, is an incredible piece of sculpture. It's incredible because it contains not only a bronze figure of a little 14-year-old girl, but it contains an actual cloth tutu. It was the first time that a combine like this had been created in art history. A tutu. You know what I think Degas' fetish was? Cloth. Tutus. When he died, they found 2 things in his studio. Ballet dancer clothes and shoes, tutus, which he used with his models, and hundreds of sculptures. He had never shown these hundreds of sculptures to anyone. They were crumbling, made of clay. At the end of his life, Degas was fascinated with movement. He was fascinated with figures. He was fascinated with flesh. He was fascinated with tutus and the textures of clothes. But he was also going blind. And at the end of his life, Edgar Degas could not see. So Edgar Degas would take a handful of clay. Do it with me now. Hold your arm out. Don't be afraid. And pretend that you're modeling a ball of clay, a human figure. Because you're blind. And you can't see the human figure anymore. But you won't be stopped. So you need clay. And without being able to see it, you're still sculpting by touch. That's genius. It's compulsion, but it's genius to not stop. Degas is sculpting these figures, and he's lighting them from behind, and barely squinting into the darkness, he can see their silhouettes. And with the last bit of light, he creates his last pastels of ballet dancers. And I have a friend who said about this, makes you wonder He's sculpting with one hand. I wonder how many times he also, with another hand, had a tutu or a piece of cloth or a pair of ballet slippers in his hand. He couldn't see it anymore, but he could feel it, and he couldn't stop. That's an amazing kind of message to us. To not stop, to not stop, to not stop, to not stop. What an amazing, vital message. One of his students, Mary Cassatt, an associate, was challenged by Degas, who once was very flippant and said, females are never as good as males. Women can never be as good as men. They can never have that kind of class and style. And Degas was very flippant about this and sent Mary Cassatt on her way. And Mary Cassatt said, no, I'm not going to let that old codger say things about me like that. And she went home and she created a piece of art, and she filled it with a kind of model which was considered very unattractive, kind of an ugly-looking woman, not a very elegant young girl at all, a very common girl. But what she did is fill her work with repeated imagery. So the biggest image that I see here is the symbol of beauty. It's the S curve, the curvature of a woman's body, the elegant form of an S curve. And it's running its way throughout the arm, up the braid, up to the elbow. It's impossible to miss. A 5-year-old could see it. What she did, though, is genius. She finds the curve in other parts of the painting. It's in the furniture. It is in the wallpaper. The same curve repeated over and over again, even flipped backwards. When Degas saw this painting on display later, he was silent, and he said 2 words, translated into English: what style? She had proven him wrong. She had proven that a woman could tap into this kind of genius just like a man. Another artist obsessed with flesh, Auguste Rodin, an artist fascinated with human form, an artist obsessed with movement, with sensuality, an artist obsessed with love, an artist obsessed with mythology and literature, anything that relates to the story of human beings. Auguste Rodin, like Degas, spent days kneading clay, always had clay in his hand. And he filled his studio with nude models who walked around, bending up and down, picking up clothes, having a sandwich in the corner, taking a nap. And whenever he saw something he loved, he'd grab that clay that was right there, and he'd make a little figure, put it aside. He's making hundreds of figures this way. This is his compulsion, his fetish. And I think that genius has something to do with this kind of fetish, something that you love. Degas was so incredibly involved in the idea of seeing things from different points of view that when he was given a commission to create a door for the Museum of Arts and Crafts in Paris, a museum which was never built, the door commission was canceled, but he bought the commission back and said, oh, I'll keep working on that door. Even though the commission is done, I want the door. And he spent 3 decades of his life encrusting the door with hundreds of those little figures that he made, blown up into life size. Imagine spending 30 years on something. He's changing the way he's working. He's involving a variety of inspirations from literature, from his own personal life. This is genius. It's so much genius that contemporary sculptors today, if they're honest, will at least quietly admit that they are in awe of Rodin because of the ground that he covered, the intensity that he gave to his work. After Rodin comes an era of Impressionism and Divisionism. Paul Signac, who paints in France during this era, covers his painting with thousands of mathematically equated applications of paint, thousands of little colors like tile. Can you see them in the audience? Each of them perfectly laid down. It's a system. It's compulsive, yes. Many people would say, I could never do that. I'd get bored doing this. But it is a system. And this is part of the system of genius, to come up with a solution to create harmony. Georgia O'Keeffe is another artist I consider a great genius. There were many artists who were moving into the landscape during the teens and 20s and 1930s in America. Georgia O'Keeffe goes to Taos, New Mexico. She discovers the land, the sky, large shapes, something that thousands of other people had seen. But Georgia O'Keeffe says, no, that's my fetish. That's what I love. She writes about it in her letters to her husband. She goes out in an old Model A Ford, alone in the desert, painting the sky, the rock formations. 1916, she too is caught up in the curvature of the land, this fantastic femininity that's evoked from the curve. The curve echoes the womb, the breast, the hip. She sees it in the landscape itself. She sees the earth as a great feminine form. Georgia O'Keeffe is going to create a style of abstraction which embraces the reality of nature. And once she starts seeing these shapes echoing, she looks around. What else did she see with those shapes? Skulls. The skulls of deer and cow left out to bleach in the desert. Georgia O'Keeffe finds her voice in the desert, discovering the curvature of rock formations and bones, and seeing the colors of the minerals in the rocks against the sky. In this case, it's not mathematics, but it's harmony. It's a unity, a sense of togetherness. Pablo Picasso. So many artists talk about Picasso as a genius. His name is thrown out as the definition of genius. It's interesting because Picasso was a creator of all of these different types of varieties of attributes. He was interested in new points of view, seeing things from different points of view conceptually as well as visually. He was very eclectic, studying African art, Asiatic art, literature, poetry. He was sensual, interested in the body. But with Picasso, we don't have to look very far to see that he too is using repeated imagery. The shape of his lover here, Marie Teresa Walter, her head has been turned into a heart. It's the simplest solution. A 5-year-old would come up with this solution. Her body has become a heart as well. Picasso's in love, so he paints hearts. It's hardly a genius that is insurmountable by mortals like us. All we have to do is think like we're 5 years old. In fact, one of Picasso's great quotes was, as a young child, I had learned to paint like an adult, like a master. It took years to learn how to paint like a child again. Look how the fingers of the reader here merge right into the pages of the book in the Norton Simon Museum's painting of the girl reading. Look how the shape of the teardrop is repeated over and over in the painting. One of his great masterpieces is also dealing with these notions of time and space. Some of you out there, could you imagine if you were 14, 15 years old and you could look into a mirror and see yourself as a 70 or 80 or 90-year-old adult? Maybe it would be an experience to remember, you know? All that age, all that wisdom. How could I get from 14 to adult? Well, Picasso shows us this. I mean, to speak as a vernacular speaker, which I can do, and I'm a painter, so I can get away with anything. This is time travel. This is someone looking into their future. It's a portrait of a very young woman. It's Marie Teresa again. She's beautiful. She's voluptuous. Her breasts are perky. She's fair. She looks into a mirror. She's grown in years, as we all do, and it's the reality. In the mirror, the reflection actually cries a tear. The breasts have lost their perkiness. The paleness has been replaced with a veil of gray. But it's poignant. But it's genius because it deals with the simple idea of time and space. This is time travel. The ability to be at two places at once, to be in the future and the present. That's Picasso. Look at the face of Marie Theresa. We see her side view and her three-quarter view at the same time. That's two views at the same time. That's time travel. That's Picasso. That's why he is a genius. Our last artist tonight is Marc Chagall, one of the great artists in all of history, one of the great Jewish artists as well. An artist whose entire life is built on fantasy and also memories. Memories of his life living in Vitebsk, memories of his beloved Bella, who he had to leave behind as he goes to France. The joy of returning back to be with his true love, Bella, again in Vitebsk. Fleeing the Nazis, ultimately losing Bella while they lived in New York during the war. Marc Chagall's genius lies in his ability to simply be a child, free from the geometry that we began with in tonight's lecture. We've come a complete circle with Chagall, someone who has allowed themselves to simply express their love for life, regardless of drawing skills. He's a terrible draftsperson. He can't draw in proportion. He tried to teach it even. He couldn't do it. But what he could do was teach a heartfelt response to life. And so when I asked you in the beginning, how many of you are artists? Only half of you raised your hand. My challenge to you is to believe that genius is not a word that belongs on a pedestal. Because if you believe it, then you're done. Because it likely doesn't apply to you. But I'm here to say that it does. And out of all the painters that I've shown who've dealt with mathematics, geometry, it's Chagall who lets it all go. And he simply paints the people in his life who he loves. And he paints like a child with no regard for technical excellence. And that's what I like to hear, because technical excellence has very little to do with genius. It's only a component, perhaps. Genius is the ability to see little components and to put them all together. That's what the artist's mind does. The ability to see fragments, to move across the landscape and to see the grass or the tree or the asphalt. That's what a common passenger does. But a genius, hopefully, would see the harmony. I can see the harmony in things, and I don't dare claim myself to be a genius. But when I see the harmony in the great masters, I realize that they were seeing harmony too. And if they can see the harmony of a fragment, a glimpse of something disappearing, if they can see the smaller pieces and understand how they fit together, then certainly I can do it. Because there is a larger holism, there's a larger unity, there's a larger overall view of humanity. Genius is the ability simply to become obsessed by that view. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, that's very kind. Thank you very much.